Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
අර පිරිමැස්ම ගැන හිතන ඔබට Vim Liquid වෙතින් රුපියල් 100ක ඉතිරියක්.
හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday the 27th of December 2022. Infamous. World Bank ranked Sri Lanka as 7th country with highest food inflation in the world. Pardon. Justice Minister says that the government is looking at releasing elderly and terminally ill prisoners. Reality versus expectations. Sri Lanka's tourism sector records over 700,000 tourists for 2022, falls short of 20,000 tourists as per government expectations. Contradiction. While Power and Energy Minister says electricity prices must be raised, MP Partly Champika Ranawaka says rate hike not needed as CB profits currently.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. In your top story for tonight, Sri Lanka was ranked 7th in the world with the highest food inflation by the World Bank in their latest food security report. According to the World Bank, Sri Lanka recorded food inflation of 74%. Now, the World Bank also expects Sri Lanka's harvest to reduce by 50% in 2023 due to a shortage and higher cost of fertilizer and reduced rainfall in the southern and central provinces. Domestic food price inflation remains high around the world. Information between August to November 2022 shows high inflation in almost all low-income and middle-income countries. According to the World Bank's Food Security Update, 88.2% of low-income countries, 90.7% of lower middle-income countries and 93% of upper middle-income countries have seen inflation levels above 5%, with many experiencing double-digit inflation. The report went on to say that the share of high-income countries with high food price inflation has risen to 81.8%. The countries affected the most are in Africa, North America, Latin America, South Asia, Europe and Central Asia. According to the World Bank, Sri Lanka ranks 7th among a list of top 10 countries that have been hit the hardest by food inflation, recording 74%. Sitting on top of the list is Zimbabwe, recording nominal food inflation of 321%, while Lebanon ranks second with 203% and Venezuela in third with 158%. The World Bank stated that the high incidence of climate shocks, depletion of foreign currency reserves, and depreciation of local currencies have kept food prices above normal levels and made healthy food less affordable in South Asia. In November 2022, year-on-year consumer price inflation for food prices was 73.7% in Sri Lanka, 31.2% in Pakistan, 8.1% in Bangladesh and 8.1% in Nepal. The report further went on to say that a shortage and higher cost of fertilizer and reduced rainfall in the southern and central provinces may decrease harvests in the upcoming production season by up to 50%. The World Bank reported Sri Lanka's inflation to have dropped to 80.9% in October and to 73.7% in November. The Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Wijesekara, says the government would have no option but to print money or raise taxes in order to provide uninterrupted power supply unless the price of a unit of electricity is raised. The minister said a unit of electricity would be raised by 48 rupees and 42 cents.
ජනවාරි මාසයේ දෙවැනිදා කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලයට ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න මේ යෝජනා කළ තියෙන ක්‍රමවේද 20 ඇතුලේ අකණ්ඩව ලබන අවුරුද්දේ විදුලිය ලබා දීම වෙනුවෙන් වියදම පමණක් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ඒකකයක් රුපියල් 48යි 742ක් බවට පත් වෙයි කියලා තමයි උපකල්පනය කරන්නේ. අපි මේ ගාස්තු සංශෝධනය නොකර මේ කටයුතු කරන්න සිදුනවා නම් ආණ්ඩුවට වෙන තියෙන විකල්ප ක්‍රම තමයි එක්කෝ බදු වැඩි කරන්න වෙනවා මේ මුදල පියවා ගැනීම සඳහා. එහෙම නැත්නම් මුදල් මුද්‍රණය කරන්න සිද්ධ වෙනවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් අපිට තවත් පැය කිහිපයකට විදුලි කප්පාදුවට යටත්ව විදුලිය ලබා දීම සඳහා ක්‍රමවේදයකට යන්න වෙනවා.
ජනතාවගේ විශ්වාසයක් ඇති කරන්න පුළුවන් ඔබතුමාලට දීර්ඝකාලීන ඔබතුමාලට විදුලිය දෙන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. අපිට ආය ක්‍රමයේ සහනය ලැබුණොත් අපිට විදුලි කප්පාදුවකින් තොරව ලබන අවුරුද්ද යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒකට 100ට කීයකින්ද විදුලි බිල වැඩි වෙන්නේ? දල වශයෙන් ඔය කියන එකේ 160ක 65ක විතර වගේ ප්‍රමාණයක් එයි.
ඔබතුමාලා යෝජනා කරන දේ ආකාරයට විදුලි බිල වැඩි වුණොත් ජනවාරි මාසයේ ජනවාරි ඉඳලා මේක පාරිභෝගිකයන්ට ගෙවන්න දෙයිද?
ඔව් ජනවාරි මාසයේ අවසාන ඉඳලා ඒක බිලට එකතු කිරීම සඳහා තමයි යෝජනා කරලා තියෙන්නේ.
Now, even though the government looks to hike electricity prices next month, independent MP partly Champika Ranamaka believes that there is no need to do so, as the Ceylon Electricity Board is profiting currently. The MP stated that the operating profit of the CEB for the month of October was 3 billion rupees and 5.5 billion rupees in November, following the rate hike carried out in August this year, and called on the government to not make a revision to the CEB and let it operate for 6 months instead.
The current fuel prices, diesel and petrol prices, simply do not reflect the market values internationally. Plus our electricity tariff, now they are talking about another hike there in the electricity tariff from January, but on August they increase it around 75%, and by operating profit of CEB is around 3 billion. In November it's 5.5 billion. So there is no need to increase electricity tariff to cope up with the incurred losses. We accepted the past years there were huge accumulated losses, and at the meantime this year alone CB got 80 billion from the government as to pay their fuel bills. So the inflated fuel bills plus the other losses incurred there in the CEB could not be the reason for the electricity hike. So let CEB to continue like this. After 6 months time we can see what kind of losses are there, and thereby the PUCS cell with the data supplied by the CEB can increase it. But till then we have to wait, because last 2 months clearly showed the CEB is earning kind of a profit with inflated fuel cost. For example, now the fuel cost, the international markets is around $80 per barrel. That means it's less than 200 rupees per liter. There are costs around, but it's coming down. We all hope that during the winter fuel prices may go up, but fortunately the fuel prices are stabilized because of the recession there in the big markets like Europe and North America.
The Minister of Justice, Prison Affairs and Constitutional Reforms, Dr. Vijay Das Rajapaksa, said today that the government has taken measures to present a bill to Parliament looking at releasing elderly prisoners and those who are terminally ill. The minister stated that through this, they expect to reduce the crowding at prisons. He added that they are looking at commencing several projects also within the prison system that would provide detainees with the opportunity to be employed, serve the country and send money to their families as well.
At the moment our prisons are overcrowded. Most of our detainees, both convicted as well as accused and suspects, are faced with charges of dangerous drugs. If it is percentage wise, around 74% of our detainees are facing the charges under dangerous drugs ordinance. Now we have presented a bill to the Parliament to establish a rehabilitation bureau. By doing that, we are expecting to get these drug addicts to rehabilitate voluntarily without going to courts. That is the main purpose of enacting that new law. In addition to that, in terms of the regulations enacted recently, we are sympathetically considering the difficulties faced by the detainees. In terms of that, we have already appointed several panels to scan each and every convicted prisoner, and there are some categories who had been in jail serving sentence for more than 25 years, 30 years. There are very elderly and feeble persons. There are persons with lot of terminal illness or cancer. Therefore, the prison is now burdened with not only to look after prisoners but also to take care of them, to look after elderly persons, to treat persons who are seriously ill. In considering all those humanitarian aspects, once we get these panel reports, we refer all the reports to an expert medical panel appointed by the Director General of Health. After they have been referred to the medical experts panel, and considering their health conditions and their old age and their feeble situations, then they can make recommendations that those prisoners can be released on humanitarian grounds. If we get such recommendation from them, then I am in a position to recommend the President that those kind of persons to be pardoned and released from the prison. In addition to that, we are going to have several projects that is for the purpose of getting their service for the development of the country, agricultural wise as well as industrial sector, that they will get an opportunity to earn certain sum of money which would be helpful for them to send their family members or their children for their education and things like that. We are going ahead with those projects also, especially after the enactment of these new regulations. We are expecting to have a lot of changes in the system.
Stay with us for more news after this short commercial break.
It's hard to keep up with the new when you're listening to the same old Slim Brand Week, a week for professionals.
Welcome back. Now, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, with funding through the United States Agency for International Development, will distribute 36,000 metric tons of triple superphosphate fertilizer to all paddy farmers in Sri Lanka through the Ministry of Agriculture. The amount of TSP provided per farmer will be determined based on the area they cultivated in 2022 and 2023 Maha cultivation season. The distribution list, along with the land extent cultivated during this Maha season, has been published and displayed at all agrarian service centres of the Department of Agrarian Development. The FAO invites all eligible paddy farmers to visit their respective agrarian service centre and ensure their details have been incorporated. The distribution list will be displayed until the 5th of January 2023, and the date of fertilizer distribution will be shared through the agrarian service centres. Now, the Commissioner General of Motor Traffic, Nishanta Veerasinghe, says that the demerit point system for driving licence will be implemented from next month in a bid to reduce the number of motor accidents reported across the country. Accordingly, a procedure of awarding demerit points and imposing related penalties will be introduced for the offences committed by various drivers. The Commissioner General further emphasised that the initial procedure for implementing this relevant point system has been completed and it is expected to be forwarded to the Cabinet in the future. The relevant points of the demerit point system will be deducted over 32 traffic offences. If 20 such points are deducted, the driving licence of the concerned driver will be suspended for a period of 1 year. Following the end of the suspension, he or she will have to go through the procedure from the beginning to obtain the driving licence once again. The Sri Lanka tourism has recorded over 700,000 tourist arrivals to the island so far this year. According to the Minister of Tourism, Harin Fernando, the government expects to end the year with a total of around 720,000 tourists. Between January this year and the 26th of December this year, Sri Lanka, an island heavily dependent on tourism to attract foreign inflows, has welcomed 701,331 tourists. According to the summary report on tourist arrivals this year, a total of 73,314 tourists have visited Sri Lanka just within this month, as at the 26th of December. Minister of Tourism Harin Fernando said the government expects tourist arrivals to hit 720,000 in total by the end of 2022. A number of 700,000 tourist arrivals is the highest annual figure recorded since 2019, as Sri Lanka's tourism came to a standstill during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, Sri Lanka was only able to welcome 540,000 tourists, while the figure plunged further to 194,495 in 2021. The tourism minister further stated that a considerable number of tourists are scheduled to visit Sri Lanka in the months of January and February next year. The government also expects to welcome 1.5 million tourists in 2023 with the operation of more flights and cruise ships to Sri Lanka. The government has also set a target of welcoming 3 million tourists in the year 2024. Now on the Colombo Stock Exchange, the main index closed in green as a result of price gains in counters such as Richard Pearce & Company, Lanka IOC and LOLC Holdings. The all-share price index rose 72.75 points to 8,452.70. The turnover meanwhile crossed 1.3 billion rupees during today's session. Similar behavior meanwhile was witnessed in the S&P SL20 as it rose 31.89 points to 2,655.59. High net worth and institutional investor participation was noted in Cargill's and Hemas Holdings. Mixed interest meanwhile was observed in Lanka IOC, SoftLogic Life, Insurance and Expo Lanka Holdings, whilst retail interest was noted in SMB Leasing Non-Voting, Browns Investments and SoftLogic Capital. Furthermore, foreigners closed as net buyers. Now let's take a look at how the rupee fared against other major currencies today. Kept its upward trend from Friday after Chinese officials announced an easing in the country's COVID restrictions. Further concerns of a Russian cut in oil production and winter storms similarly affecting US oil production helped keep prices floating. Oil prices rose to 3-week high today as China's latest easing of COVID-19 restrictions spurs fuel demands, while concerns that the winter storms across the United States would affect energy production continue to support prices. Brent crude was up 52 cents at $84.44 a barrel, and the US West Texas Intermediate crude was at $80.04 a barrel, up 48 cents. Last Friday, Brent rose 3.6%, while the WTI gained 2.7% as they recorded their biggest weekly gain since October. British and US markets were closed for the Christmas holiday. The greenback softened after China said it would drop its quarantine rule as a weaker dollar makes oil cheaper for holders of other currencies. Analysts said that oil prices are drawing support from worries about supply disruption due to winter storms in the United States. Concerns over a possible production cut by Russia also contributed to oil price gains. International media quoted that Russian Deputy Prime Minister saying that Russia may cut oil output by 5% to 7% in the early 2023 as it responds to price caps. The Russian ruble weakened today, struggling to consolidate a slight recovery from last week's slide as the market comes to terms with the prospect of lower export revenue in the wake of restrictions on Russian oil. The ruble lost about 8% against the dollar and it's on course for a monthly decline after an oil embargo and price cap came into force. The Finance Ministry has said the recent slump was related to recovering imports. The ruble was 1.2% weaker against the dollar at 70.110, but still some way off the almost 8-month low of 72.6325 struck last week. Against the euro, the ruble lost 1.1% to 74.35 and against the yuan it was down 1.9% at 9.95. The ruble remains the world's best performing major currency against the dollar this year, supported by capital controls and reduced imports. Welcome back. Now, China will scrap quarantine for travelers from the 8th of January, marking the last major shift from the country's zero-COVID policy. After almost 3 years of closed borders, this will reopen the country to those with work and study visas or seeking to visit family. Now, the immigration authorities said that Chinese citizens will also be able to travel overseas from the 8th of January. China is the last major economy in the world to move to living with COVID after 3 years of lockdowns, closed borders and mandatory quarantine for COVID cases and contacts. The so-called zero-COVID approach battered the economy and made citizens wary of restrictions and repeated tests. Resentment against the policy exploded into rare public protests against President Xi Jinping in November, which was followed by authorities dropping COVID rules just a few weeks later. Closed borders remain the last major restriction. Since March 2020, anyone entering China had to undergo mandatory quarantine at a state facility for up to 3 weeks at a time. This was recently reduced to 5 days. But on Monday, the National Health Commission announced that COVID would be formally downgraded to a Class B infectious disease on the 8th of January. That meant quarantine would be axed, although incoming travelers will still need to take a PCR test. A cap on the daily number of flights allowed into China would also be scrapped. Chinese citizens wishing to apply for visas to travel abroad will also be able to do so from the 8th of January. Prior to the pandemic, the number of outbound tourists from China stood at 155 million in 2019, according to Statistica. This number dropped to 20 million in 2020. The Russian forces shelled and bombed towns and cities in eastern and southern Ukraine today, a day after Russia's foreign minister rather said that Kyiv must accept Moscow's demands for ending the war or else suffer defeat on the battlefield. Now, those demands include Ukraine recognizing Russia's conquest on a fifth of its territory. Kyiv, however, armed and supported by the United States and its NATO allies, has vowed to recover all occupied territory and drive out all Russian soldiers. Britain's defense ministry said in its latest update of the military situation in Ukraine that fighting was particularly intense around the strategic eastern city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk province and Svatov, further north in Lugansk province. Donetsk and Lugansk, which make up the industrial Donbass, are both claimed along with 2 southern Ukrainian regions by Russia. Reuters footage showed fires burning in a large residential building in Bakhmut, while debris littered the streets and most buildings had their windows blown out. In his nightly video message on Monday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called the situation along the front line in Donbass difficult and painful. After suffering a series of defeats in its special military operation, Russia is now seeking a battlefield victory by capturing Bakhmut, an industrial city with a pre-war population of 70,000, now reduced to 10,000, mostly elderly residents. Gaining control of the city could give Russia a stepping stone to advance into 2 bigger cities. And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Until then, tune us on our social media for the latest updates. Have a pleasant evening and good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.